there is no glass ceiling over your head TAM-wise. I dare you. I dare anyone, not just in our space, in any energy space. Well, I'm going to get a lot of social media problems with this one. It's all BS. You cannot attack this space without annihilating the combustion products of natural gas. You can't. But look at the planet. That's a terrible way to sell. Don't sell that way. You basically got to come into someone and say, here's the equation that is the truism for industrial heat. $6 trillion of TAM globally, and are saying, I need to be first to get my piece of that. And they're looking at us. Yes, we're making thermal energy sexy.
Hello and welcome to another podcast from Pantokrator in our continuing series on thermal energy storage. Today I'm absolutely thrilled to introduce to you someone I think many of you may know very, very well, but in a new role, is Pasquale Romano, new CEO of Tempo Energy. Welcome, Pasquale.
Thanks, Andre. I really appreciate you having me on. Not so new. I've been here a little over 18 months, so I actually kind of sort of know what's going on.
Still somewhat new, but well, got your feet under the table. Alex and I have been sort of very keen to kind of get together with you and kind of find out what's going on. You've done a rebrand. There's a lot going on. But I think it'd be great to kind of start with just a little bit of background. I mean, you're quite well known in the industry, but just a little bit of background and then kind of how you got into thermal energy storage. It was one of those areas that people felt was kind of underloved until recently. And it's kind of interesting to hear kind of how you found yourself in this sector, which we think is actually huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's in a nutshell, you essentially answered the question for me. The sector is enormous, which is why I'm here for two main reasons: is virtually limitless financial with respect to upside. If you use 24-hour batteries to decarbonize, fully electrify all the process heat in the world, it's a $6 trillion market. So it's effectively, I don't care what sub-region on the planet that you look at, it is an absolutely limitless market. And, a little bit of background, the last 13 years, I ran a company called ChargePoint. That's where many of your listeners might have run across me before. And the difference between this space and that space is exactly this, not the size necessarily of the market, although that market is smaller terminal value. But what's interesting is that that space is fully dependent on the penetration of electric vehicles into the install base for your revenue to grow. So companies in the EV charging sector, I was on them for a very long time, and the company still continues to evolve and thrive. That problem set is severe because no matter what you do, you can't exceed the TAM. You can't exceed the market that the TAM makes available, and the TAM expands under circumstances that are somewhat beyond your control. Charging does influence the acceptance of EVs, as we've seen in the press, but you've basically got to wait. In this company, you don't have to wait. A quarter of the globe final energy is being basically enabled by fossil fuels. It's primarily natural gas. There's some other things mixed in, but they're all fossil fuels. It's relatively unelectrified. It's ground zero from an electrification perspective. But there is no glass ceiling over your head TAM-wise. You're limited only by how fast you can make a product that pencils for the particular vertical and region that you're going after. That's why I'm here. It is underinvested as a space. There's not that many companies going after this. It is challenging technologically because you have to create a product that enables electricity to be cheaper than natural gas, or no one's going to buy it. You can't depend on subsidies because these are 20-year projects. uh, Everyone wants to see durability in the economics, because the end customer is a conservative industrial customer that has to count on their energy economics. By the way, right now they can't in Europe, in many parts of
Mhm.
the world, because of the volatility associated with the sources of natural gas for countries and regions that don't have it natively. As you can, it's an unfortunate situation that we have yet another conflict upon us. I hate to benefit from conflict. It's somewhat, kind of morally disturbing. However, what it proves to the world is that energy independence is about generating energy locally and diversely,
Yep. Yep.
geographically diversely. You can't have a dependence on 20% of your energy going through one little narrow waterway somewhere in the world. I don't care if it's the most peaceful place in the world today. It may
Yeah.
not be that later.
Yeah.
And the beauty
Yeah.
of renewables are completely local.
Yeah. It's interesting where, if you look 10, 15 years ago, energy was, you just assume it's there, right? The grid's there. And particularly, with thermal heat, very few people, it was not a sexy thing that anybody really cared about at all. And Alex and I have been following this sector for about 3, 4 years now. And we see, there's continued interest in it. There's energy security, there's cost of energy, there's a lot of the things you mentioned. But I get the feeling that, a lot of investors are going to have is car charging was like super sexy and it was super big. I mean, there was so many deals that the 2018 to 2023 or 24. I mean, that was the biggest, sector, right? By far. And you were CEO of probably the biggest company out there. And so I think a lot of people sort of saying, well, if someone like Pasquale is interested in this space, I think I'm going to have a second look at industrial heat, because why would he be interested in something like this? And I think we've seen a little bit of a reaction like that already. I mean, and then there's other companies coming in, but it seems that there's the lid has come off and people are looking at it and realizing there's actually quite a bit to do here. So I think you're coming into the space is kind of very welcome.
Well, what's interesting is this is my fifth startup, and in every single one of them, there has been a truism. The first principles on the economic value of the space has always been there. But the general awareness and acceptance that it's quote unquote sexy, hot, investable was never there at the beginning, even inclusive of ChargePoint. So while in with 2020 hindsight, it looks like my last endeavor was, in this hot, sexy space. Not when we started, there were no EVs on the road. So at that point, people were still arguing as to whether it was going to be hydrogen, which, by the way, I offend people out there, but I don't understand why anyone would even think of that economically. We can get into that in a different podcast. And
Whole
I'm
different podcast.
well known for being opinionated, but there's no economic thing. And so I was fighting the good fight at the beginning of that company, just to prove that there was viability in the space in the long term, electrification of transportation, which in hindsight now is obvious. So, and second example, I'll give you totally outside of our space. I just read an article on a company a friend of mine works at SanDisk, and the article was about memories in general. SanDisk and Micron are two very hot stocks right now. It's very sexy right now. 2 years ago, I bet you would have had a hard time attracting any kind of dynamic
Mhm.
employee into those companies, because they weren't sexy. They were making memory. Memory is not sexy, but now it's sexy. So my prediction is that we're bringing sexy to this space, and because it's not sexy now, it's giving me confirmation that I might be onto something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously we agree with you, but and we've been liking the sector as a whole. But I guess my question, Pasquale, is why Tempo, or what was previously known as RedoxBlox, right? And which maybe most people are kind of aware of that. But I mean, you obviously did some kind of homework, and you look through kind of, okay, where do I go? I like the space. Where do I go? And how did you end up choosing Tempo Energy?
So I luckily, it's a positive and a negative. I'm an engineer by trade, and I'm infectiously curious about all things technology. So I spent a lot of time on engineering, and as a CEO of a company, it also can be a problem if you're spending a lot of time on just the technology, which I don't. I balance my day, but in this particular case, that pre-bias is an asset because you have to look at the physics of trying to replace natural gas. So start with the following thesis. A conservative customer is not going to re-engineer their entire process line to deal with a new source of heat that may be at the process temperature, but not at the exhaust gas temperature in the same zip code anyway. So if you're in the same zip code as the exhaust gas temperature of a natural gas combustor, then you don't have to change anything beyond that. If you, and there's diagrams in this space that I frankly laugh at. The diagrams are, oh, this is the process segmentation by heat type, and these are the companies that can attack that. It's all BS. You cannot attack this space without annihilating the combustion products of natural gas. You can't, because you are asking the customer to re-engineer their line, and they're not going to do that. So, or I think it's too much friction anyway. They might eventually do that, but you'll get old and gray before that time
Yeah, for sure.
arises. So then if you look at Tempo, what's the real value? It has the exclusive intellectual property on a class of ceramics that both store energy because their heat capacity is very high, and because they're conductive, and because they have a chemical storage component. So not all of the energy is stored literally as sensible heat. So conductive, by the way, I don't mean thermally conductive, which they are,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they are electrically conductive. So why do these things matter? One, charging speed influences your low cost of electricity as an input.
For sure.
So you're trying to electrify something. It's a fuel switching game, and you got to acquire electricity as fast as humanly possible when it's being surplus generated by renewables, because that's when you can get it cheaper. Okay. That's one. It's got to conduct try to do it with heating elements. Good luck with that. Right. The second problem set is it can't react negatively with air, because if you want to emulate natural gas combustion and the end device isn't sealed, they're not sealed, air comes out of them or gas comes out of them. The problem is that you can't put it in an inert closed loop with the end device. And if you want a working fluid effectively, air is the only free one that can basically withstand the temperature. You can't use oil. You can't use, you can't use molten salt. You can't use, God forbid, liquid metals. There's these crazy ideas out there. Crazy ideas. The simplest thing to use is air. You put a blower on one side of the product, you blow air through it, you pick up the heat in the air. It is super hot and regulated on the output by mixing it ambient, so you can regulate to the temperature, and you blow that air into the offtake device right where the natural gas combustor would have been bolted, and you use the right volume of air and temperature to hit the power requirements for that device. That's it. That is the entire space in a nutshell. That is the only reason that aside from an awesome team, it is the primary reason that I joined Tempo. It's that approach, that magical material doesn't react negatively with air, so you can use it as a working fluid.
Yeah.
Boom, conduct electricity so you can heat it up fast. Third, stores energy endothermically and releases it exothermically chemically. So there's a boost. So your box isn't just as big as the sensible heat that you can heat up, a box of rocks and accomplish. It's not just that. And so that's why this is a unique company. And then the second problem that, which was the easy part, which is when I came in, is how do you package that so it can
Yeah.
be installed like battery electric storage is installed today. It's
Yeah.
containerized and
Yeah.
you plop it down like cookies.
Hmm.
And you got to make it in a factory like cookies because you got to make it in really high volume because there's a lot of energy in an industrial site. So these are not small
Mm.
problem sets. So if you can do
Yeah.
all that and you can make it at a cost where the energy that you buy and the electricity that you buy, plus the fully amortized install cost of our product is less than what you pay for natural gas, then you get thumbs up. And if that answer is not the case, then you get thumbs down. And if you obfuscate it and subsidize it, you get the early days of solar where you basically have companies that are doing great and then not. And I'm not up for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So which kind of there's a lot of kind of advantages you've got against, I guess, existing technologies, which you're also you're shooting at a very high temperature, which means you can do lower temperatures at a very efficient rate, right? Cost effectively. I guess my question is, we've been seeing that the market is kind of heading in this sort of heat as a service model, right? And a lot of the players are there because they say, well, customers, they don't want to handle the, going from a boiler to a more complex system. We don't want to handle it. And we just want to buy heat. So there's a migration in the sector towards that. And that's naturally leading those players into kind of being aggregators or kind of almost project managers, right? And which I guess where you guys are actually, you're still at really, we're the tech guys, right? And I think the sense I got was that you're still very much at that end, which is quite different from where the rest of the sector has shifted.
Right. So there's a couple reasons. First of all, I've been burned by just about every business model out there. Okay. And so I've seen this take play and I understand the economics. I understand the project economics. And I also understand where our durable value within the market is and where our durable value is. So I'll make a couple of bold statements that I think are true. This could incite a social media war with other people in the space, which I hope it doesn't. I don't mean to offend people, but the bottom line is there's no thermal energy storage or energy company period that is going to be a novel entrant in the world of project finance with respect to energy and saying, wow, we have come up with an amazing spreadsheet model that no one else has thought of in this space that enables us to make all these input economics pencil against natural gas better than anyone else. And boy, the intellectual property in this company is this spreadsheet here. I dare you, I dare anyone, not just in our space, in any energy space, to basically say that their differentiation is going to be in their ability to optimize the input side of the equation, right? In terms of energy, right? And so I'm just not going to waste my investors' money trying. I'm going right to end state. End state is you're either a product company or you're a project company. And the reason that you can't be normally both is that unless you have the only way to accomplish that product in the space, which you see, we have competitors. So we're not the only game in town. There's pluses and minuses to our solutions. Okay. Because we aren't the only people that can electrify industrial heat. I think we can do it the most economically. I think we have the best technology, but we're not the only people in the space. As a result, there is no long-term project investor. And by the way, their return profile requirements, they are not venture return profile requirements. These are pension fund return profile requirements. Okay.
Yeah.
There's not a single one of them that long term is going to want to put money into a project co where the technology is captive.
Yeah.
You're going
Yeah.
to say, well, what happens if some civilization on, some other planet comes down to Earth where the magical better way to do this, I can't use it. Not with my capital, thank you. So you're going to go there anyway. Now, many people will say, well, it's not financeable right now. So you've got to get started that way. And of course, we're going to be technology companies. Okay. So now you're just going to go compete with the people ultimately that have to buy stuff from you. Or what you can do is you could basically help them out by, taking on some of the warranty risk for an early
Yeah.
product. You can make sure that your granularity is small so the customer doesn't view, or the energy services company or project developer slash financer, they need to be able to start small. Even though you have to be able to get big, they have to be able to start small. These are all the things that we're doing, right, to enable the company to get off the ground, but not have to go to the ugly place of having to burn, or I should say, light on fire a bunch of venture capital to buy your own product to be able to install it somewhere. And God forbid, you're basically obfuscating the economics, saying, oh, I'm going to use 45X and this and that. You're heading right for the solar cliff, right to the solar. If it doesn't pencil on an unsubsidized basis, stop. Stop.
I think you will start off a social media channel there. I can guarantee you, Pasquale. But you know, but I think actually a lot of people ultimately will agree and to say, but the industry, in order to kind of commercialize, because I think it's been sluggish, right? There are projects here, there's commercialized there, but it's slower than the rest of the world wants. And I think in order to kind of get it going, people are not just reaching out to customers who want heat, but are thinking of grid solutions, energy trader, and also then combining that with BESS as well as
Sure.
cheap generation, BESS and tests, and in a way, kind of broadening it out so much to saying, well, I started out as being a replacement for a boiler, and now I got to be an energy aggregator. I think, but that's a completely different business model from where, and I think the industry's still trying to find its feet in that, and that's what we find is fascinating. And I agree with you. The VC world is going to want tech, and I think we're at the beginning of some tech, and it will change and evolve. But it's a space I think where we'll see many of the different players that are kind of your peers, as it were, will be finding different routes into the market or different ways in which to, are my product guy or my project guy, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, it eventually always delaminates. So what we're trying to do is be as capital efficient as possible. And to your point on the commingling of the energy economics, I'll just offer you one example I think you've hit the nail on the head. Right now, if I said the word, well, I'm going to say it. I'm going to say data center. Okay, now I can raise my
There we
hand.
go. Okay.
Done. Here's how thermal energy storage, I think, truly, broadly affects data center. Broadly. Some of the biggest problems with financing generation projects to deal with the increasing demand of electricity. So the grid hasn't grown previous to AI. There was essentially no load growth.
Mm-hmm.
Some things were at stasis, and it was in the United States, it's reduced to a bunch of regional regulated monopolies. We need to fix that problem. There's a whole bunch of issues there. That's a whole nother podcast. But if you look, it was in stasis and suddenly it's not. And it wasn't ready to not be in stasis. So now if you look at the energy generation project, you're like, well, what do I do with if I build to peak, which is very valuable. It's very valuable. Data centers are like, yeah, can you make power? Awesome. How much is it? 4 times as much as that peak that was enforced 2 years ago. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not going to last. I'm 60 years old and I've seen a million cycles. That is not going to last. The cost vice is going to come on. But right now, and for the foreseeable future, that is true. And so if you want to build an energy project with pension fund capital, you have to figure out how to make the low end, the surplus periods, not be a drag on the overall economics. That's what's limiting, one of the factors that's limiting the overall economics. Well, guess what? Let's say you have large industrials. Oh, say, I don't know, in a wonderful place called Germany. Let's say you have very large industrials in the industrial heart of Europe. And you have a situation where you have overgeneration, you have renewables bill, you have overgeneration challenging the project economics of the periods where there is high demand. If you coordinate it a little bit, where you're one energy source company slash project developer slash financier, right? All of that ecosystem, you can subsidize potentially the electrification of an industrial player. So you have a guaranteed non-zero offtake for a
Mhm.
large, you can set your watch by an industrial player's energy consumption. You can set your watch by it. They make the same number of widgets plus or minus every day, every month, every year.
Mhm.
So that
Yeah.
offtake is counterparty credit's awesome. The offtake guarantee is wonderful. So now you got a 20-year offtake. So you know you're not paying a random amount to basically
Mhm.
dump plus energy. So now you're like, okay, I got the downside covered. I can build more upside. That's where I think, and by the way, last I checked, no one in our space is going to raise enough capital on venture markets. I don't care who you are, to basically be able to make that equation work.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that example that I'm giving is only one of a number that are likely enforced or going to be enforced. Life has more imagination than we do in the energy sector. We go through an unprecedented demand shift from stasis to, oh my God, we're going from stasis to wow in a period of time that the energy sector is not fundamentally equipped to respond to.
Very good. But well, I guess touching on the market itself in terms of we just view it as in a very strange place. As you mentioned, it doesn't really fit into the venture definition anymore. In terms of quite a lot of money was raised over the last couple of years. Then we've started to see commercial announcements, but relatively speaking, it's actually not too many players, maybe 30 to 40. They're a huge market. I remember in one of our prior conversations, speaking of data centers, that the industrial heat opportunity is about 30 times the size. you know, Relatively speaking, AI is, this big hype aspect, but, industrial heat is actually far, far bigger, but you have barely anyone actually looking at it. Even if
Yes.
everyone in the space, was getting gigawatt sized contracts, month after month, you would barely tap the surface.
Right.
So I guess, well, my question would be, how do you see the market and Tempo's role in it in terms of, because it seems more to me that, as Andre was saying, you're actually much more VC oriented in terms of, your approach is more, okay, we're going to keep lean. We're not going to, build out these massive projects, get these big factories. We're going to, remain focused on our tech, on our product.
Yeah. So for me, longer term, manufacturing, repeatability, scale, work rapidity, how rapidly you can mature a manufacturing process and how stable you can make it accretes to a tremendous amount of long-term value. That is a very difficult equation to run as a startup with your own factories for, I'll give you one reason, but there are many. Aside from, competency, because there are people out there that do this, for a living for many, many years for many, many different customers. So you're not going to be a contract manufacturer in terms of manufacturing competences, 10 guys with PhDs. So, so the, the problem is one of factory capacity and also footprint agility. So the problem that you have with factory capacity is that if you use VC dollars and you spend all the money to acquire a building, you might get some local incentives so that you can offset some of that, outfit it with CapEx, take on the burden of an enormously high turnover operator force acquisition and training, all that sort of stuff. The problem that you have is the minute you start, you're underabsorbed because you have to amortize all that capex into now an underutilized revenue. Your revenue is underutilizing initially because you're not going to build a factory that's right up against your pipeline because you're going to be short capacity the minute you're out of the gate. So now you're going to build something that's bigger. And so now you're going to be underabsorbed. So your gross margin is going to look pretty terrible. and the actual EBITDA is going to be pretty terrible. And then what's going to happen is one day you're going to close in on filling that factory. And you're going to be popping champagne with your CFO saying, wow, look at our gross margin. And we're finally throwing off some cash. And then your CRO is going to come to you with a pipeline update saying, we need a bigger boat. And so now you have to go make another factory. So you go right back to underabsorbed. The initial condition problem is the problem for startups with factories. It's why getting a new car company off the ground, read Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, right, in the US, I was in that space for so many years. They all have issues raising capital. Now, if you're Elon, you have a massive cult of personality. So that is driving forward valuation because of all things Elon. So he could raise money on the public markets with a vision, right? The normal companies can't do that. So kudos to Elon for pulling that off. But the problem set here is you are either continuously behind in capacity or over or underabsorbed with your capacity. Now, if you have 30 factories, adding the 31st, second, third, fourth, that's round off error compared to your core, which is fully utilized or close to fully utilized. So that's not a problem. So what do you have to do? If you're us, make sure your design doesn't assume that the 10 PhDs that invented the technology are required on the assembly line to hand adjust and tune things. You've got to have design intentionality for high volume production using standard off the shelf equipment where possible and making an assumption of an operator force, an assembly technician force that is marginally trained on your product, meaning it's like an IKEA furniture box. It's got to be the equivalent of IKEA or it doesn't work in contract.
Yeah, standardization of eyes.
So now imagine when I parachuted into the company, we had primarily a bunch of incredibly capable material science oriented PhDs. And I'm like, super cute. Yeah. We got to put this in a container. We got to meet the logistics requirements of, over the road, sea and, rail transport. It's got to be manufacturable anywhere because of all the made in Europe, 45X in the US, all that sort of stuff. And by the way, you can't be there or anywhere near it in close proximity because the labor cost where we are not going to cut it. So now you imagine the look of shock, terror, horror, and all of the above on, okay, here's the new guy. Okay. The new guy comes in and he just drops a ton of constraints on us. Oh my God, we're going to die. Okay.
I mean, it's
You're not. What we're going to do is we're going to hire people that know how to do that side of the equation. And they're going to work with you to come up with the right adjustments to everything about the technology to make this possible. And so that's what we did. We just added the diversity of capabilities to the team. Oh, 50 people. It's not like you need a zillion people to do this. And that's where the magic happens is the design intentionality for high volume manufacturing off the shelf use of standard equipment in the manufacturing process wherever possible, standard off the shelf materials wherever possible, et cetera. That's it.
I think also on standardization, it's also, minimizing the EPC cost and actually, instead of doing every single project as bespoke, doing it on site. If you're going to be doing so many of these projects, you don't want to reinvent the wheel constantly because otherwise every single time it's just going to be death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah. So the funny thing about I'm not a hard tech, I'm not a clean tech hard tech guy, but there's a lot of hard problems in EV charging, but physics, we weren't trying to push the boundaries of the laws of physics in my previous companies. Here we are. So the problem is a lot of the folks in this space, they come out, I spent 20 years at, pick your oil and gas company, pick your, large industrial. Is there anything wrong with that experience? Absolutely not. It's incredibly valuable. Why is it valuable? I know exactly what we're dealing with on the other side. Are there blind spots with all perspectives? So I don't mean to offend anyone there because everyone's got blind spots. A mutt is a healthy animal. You need to have a lot of genetic diversity, but that's another podcast. So the folks in that come from heavy industry use an economic playbook that says 100 kilowatt hours is worse than a megawatt hour, is worse than 10 megawatt hours, is worse than a gigawatt hour from a cost structure perspective. That is so not true with respect to thermal energy. It's so not true. I can prove it mathematically. It's not true. And the reason is you're not trying to build one or two. Okay. You're trying to rapidly electrify a $6 trillion market. So how are you going to do that? You're going to make it like cookies, because if you make it like cookies in a factory, your supply chain leverage is huge. Your EPC costs are incredibly minimal. Look at battery electric storage. What did they settle on? Guess what? They settled on containerized systems that are pre-skidded. In many cases, all the associated accoutrements for balance of plant are pre-skidded. They drop in on site simply. They're sitting, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the grid interconnect to get done. They can build the damn thing ridiculously fast. Once it's permitted and they got the grid interconnect done, it just goes bang. It just drops in on site. Watch solar get built now. It's ridiculously fast, right? And that's ridiculously cheap. So our head of strategy came out of oil and gas. He spent a lot of years there. And he said the playbook was that bill of materials for the input components for the stuff, for the hard stuff, which in our world is the product cost. That was, roughly 25% of the project cost. And I'm like, wow, that's terrible. That's insane. You need to get the transformation cost on site needs to be, like maybe 20% of the total project. It can't be 75% outside and 25% of the stuff you're shipping on site, plus the operator force in construct on site. They're local by definition. So, okay, you build one here and you build another one, 600 miles away. And then people aren't commuting. So now you got to retrain them. And by the way, there's prevailing wage laws. So people with high-vis vests and hard hats, they're expensive. The minute I see that on site, I'm like, oh, that's not going to work. What works is minimizing the number of high-vis vests and hard hats on site, minimize that to absolutely, drive it to zero, okay? And shove it all into a factory someplace with a low cost of labor and a good pipeline access to raw materials, so get it all positioned in the right spot. And then ramp that with contract manufacturers that turn the crank hard for a living and just blast it out like cookies. And by the way, you can leverage their balance sheets as well. So that's my religion. I've had that religion since I got into my career out of grad school, and I have done it that way every single time. The only time I was actually building a factory, the only time is if there is ridiculous IP in the manufacturing process, where it's like the Coca-Cola formula is in a
Yeah,
vault.
you don't want to speak out.
Okay, fine. Go build a factory. But otherwise, or if there's incredible inefficiency in the margin stack in your supply chain, yeah, vertically integrate. Maybe it's not final assembly that you vertically integrate on, but maybe design and vertically integrate on a bunch of things, and you eventually get to final assembly. Sure, if there's incredible pressure where it just doesn't work, if there's any margin at all, going to anyone outside of raw, literally, sheet steel, things like that. Great, build a factory. But if it ain't that, don't build a factory.
Well, I think also the other aspect, as you briefly touched on, is, the real boogeyman for the industry isn't actually your other competitors. It's, lithium-ion, in terms of if you're not able to standardize to actually compete against the cost, that's ultimately actually going to be the real threat. In the background also, on some of our prior discussions, you need to be profitable without actually relying on subsidies. in terms of for any investor, if, you're saying my business case relies on long-term subsidies, maybe at the start of an industry that can help. But if you're saying I can never generate, a decent, like, even for project guys, a decent IRR without constant subsidies baked in, that's just not going to work long term.
No, that's called charity. I'm sorry. I'm a ridiculously staunch environmentalist. I'm sitting in a house with 38 kilowatts of solar on the roof and plenty of battery storage. So my carbon footprint, at least in my personal home, is zero. And I have two EVs, and I haven't driven a gas car in 16 years at all, period. Not even a plug-in hybrid. So my personal bent is absolute. Okay. Now, how do I affect that globally? You affect it globally by not appealing to conscience. That is historically a terrible way to sell. Is please subsidize me because otherwise I don't work. But look at the planet. That's a terrible way to sell. Don't sell that way. You basically got to come into someone and say, here's the equation that is the truism for industrial heat. Your levelized cost of heat, which is essentially your levelized cost of natural gas. That is your levelized cost of heat, 90% case. That must be greater than the levelized cost of storage for whatever storage solution you're going to use to electrify your industrial heat process. And that includes, by the way, all the modifications of the downstream devices. So that's got it all advertised in. So that's not only the storage cost, but that's the modification to enable the use of that storage. Okay. So take that into account too. And then add to that the levelized cost of electricity, which is an input. And if those two things added together are less than the levelized cost of natural gas at that site, thumbs up.
Yep.
If they're not, thumbs down. That's it. It's the world. By the way, this is also the simplest company I've ever worked for dimensionally, in that simple governing equation is the governing equation that determines our success and everyone else's success in the space. You can obfuscate the hell out of it if you want to. You can say, my levelized cost of heat to you is X, which is 20% less than your current levelized cost of gas. Great. If I'm an industrial customer, I might buy that, but how did you get there? How did you get there? Did you bake in the phase of the moon, 17 subsidies, a grant, game over? Buy. See.
And that, Pasquale, kind of points to why everyone's heading to Europe. Europe now famously has got, if not 3, probably 4 times the price of gas as North America.
That's right.
There's energy security. There's also a lot of negative priced electricity. I mean, the renewables are growing faster than the grid's able to cope with it. So you've got a kind of a perfect storm developing in Europe, where you've got kind of those bits you mentioned in the equation, they're kind of coming together. And the question I've got for you, kind of as we close, is, what are your kind of plans kind of over the next couple of years? I mean, how do you see Tempo Energy growing, and is Europe part of your plans, or what's on your to-do list?
So I'm very opportunistic in America. If there's subsidies or things out there that will make it work, I'm happy to sell in our home country. Of course, I'm an American and I want to see the best for where I live. The problem set here is the levelized cost of natural gas is lower than just the levelized cost of an incredibly competitive storage solution. So in the United States, you're incredibly pressured unless there is some LCFS credit add in or something else, which makes the business quite regional, or worse, quite spot. So you can't bring a broad scale business model that scales efficiently into the United States under current course and speed. But the second biggest problem in the United States, and it's the biggest, I think, in general for the energy industry in the United States, and this usually starts yet another, I'm going to get a lot of social media problems with this one. and the other ones. This I'm bracing. So our fully regulated regional monopoly system for electricity, I understand the lack of federal preemption in the energy space. I understand the states' rights issues. I've been in U.S. energy policy for a long time. It doesn't matter. It's got to go. It's got to get deregulated. Europe is fully deregulated. It is a rich market. Does Europe have issues still with fully transportable PPAs across the broad scale sector? Sure. Does it have T&D economics that it needs to regionally work through? Yes. Can they? Yes. Are they addressing it because they're renewables first? Yes. The equation only works right now outside of North America because the combination of a regulatory regime being essentially recalcitrant and the availability of untaxed, uncarbon leveled natural gas across North America. We don't have a carbon tax like Europe does. And by the way, what's interesting about that is we're not actually bearing the social cost of running on fossil fuels. We're not bearing the social cost of that at all. So we have this unlevel playing field in the United States where there's an artificial shift to using natural gas as it's a waste product in many areas in using that for fuel. So it's until that gets fixed, it ain't a market. The market is squarely Europe, squarely Southeast Asia. China is certainly a market, but a challenging market to play if you're not in the region and located there. And then you have, Australia, right, which has, incredible economics for this, et cetera. So there's huge markets. And oddly, North America, which includes Mexico and Canada, for a lot of the same reasons that the United States doesn't work, are not great markets for this. So, our entire investment in go to market is largely in Europe, largely.
Yeah. And I think this is a big year. I mean, if you're able to talk about it, you've got a couple of transactions, or one is you're looking at a capital raise. The other one is you've got some customer projects that are going. So 26, just in the short term, is there anything you care to comment about kind of what you got over the next 12 months?
The pipeline's deep. We're in integration studies with a very large number of customers. So we're into brass tacks with how to make it work. Most of that's in Europe, virtually all of it. There's some in the United States. The first projects are going in the U.S. End of this year and early part of next. Right now, the focus in the company is to get the supply chain ramped, the contract manufacturers and other suppliers. As Elon likes to put it, and I borrowed a phrase, it's like chewing on broken glass. No matter who you are, no matter when you try to bring up a product in production, if you have your own factory, it's worse than chewing on broken glass. And that's the throes of what we're involved in right now is how do you get repeatable, reliable, cost-effective product out of a very capable supply chain with very cool partners. We'll make some announcements shortly with whom they are. And not because I think fundamentally that changes our technology equation, but I think it speaks to our ability to pull this off, right? We have a lot of people in our corner that also win if we win. And I like to construct supply chains that way. So you'll see that happening. 27 is the year where we are fighting the issues we can't even see now because we haven't produced a large, and no one has in this space, large enough number of repeatable products through a fact to know what we have to fight to stabilize that. We'll be doing that. It doesn't mean the product coming out will be screened and perfectly reliable and good. And we're not going to ship something we're not proud of, but getting that home prime by the end of 27, the dawn will break and we'll be able to turn the crank pretty hard And that's when magic happens. I'm not going to step on the accelerator, and I didn't say gas, but I'm not going to step on the accelerator until I'm positive that that machine can support it. And once I know that machine can support it, look out, world, because the scaling problem then is quite a bit simpler than if we had the monkey on our back.
Yeah.
Then I got downstream project developers that are worried. Do we have to get involved with EPC? Sure. Are we going to have to co-sell? Sure. Right? I mean, sure. Do I have it 100% on my back? No. Do I have other people aligned that want to win in this space to be first as our friends? Yes. On the supply chain side and on the go-to-market side, we are going to lean in hard and make those folks successful, but they're going to lean in just as hard because they see $6 trillion of TAM globally and are saying, I need to be first to get my piece of that. And they're looking at us like we look at our contract manufacturing partners. It's like, where do I need them? Right? Because I can't do it by myself. You can't do this by yourself is the problem.
Yeah. So
And
that's
by the
really
way,
building up the.
it's just true of this space. You can't do it by yourself. It's true of most.
Yeah. No, I was about to say it's kind of building up the expertise to deal with the unknowns that you're going to have in the future because every industry's got it. But, I think it's having that depth of ability to kind of address those things when they do come, So this is exciting times. So, thank you for sharing kind of these insights with us, Pasquale. Always a thrill for us. And it's exciting space. I think you're adding a lot of energy to it. So we wish you the very best, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Yes, we're making thermal energy sexy.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you guys. See you, Alex and Andre. Bye bye.